The rain was falling so hard that night that I could barely see the front porch where I had spent 40 years raising my daughter. Lauren stood inside the doorway, her arms folded across her chest, while her husband watched from behind her. "You're homeless now, Mom," she said. Those 4 words hurt more than losing my husband. At 67 years old, I stood outside my own house, carrying only a purse and an old wooden box my late husband had told me never to lose. My daughter believed she had finally taken everything from me. What Lauren never bothered to check was the name that still appeared on the ownership documents of the house behind her. And that mistake was about to change all of our lives. If my story touches your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. I'd also love to hear what you would have done if your own child had said those words to you. Please share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes these stories a little easier to tell. My name is Catherine Reed, and before my daughter told me I was homeless, I spent nearly 40 years believing I had built the kind of family every woman dreams about. My husband Michael used to say that a home was not made from wood paint or bricks. He believed a home was made from sacrifices no one ever saw. When I met Michael Reed in the summer of 1981, I was 22 years old and working as a substitute teacher in Columbus, Ohio. He was a young civil engineer with rough hands, a warm smile, and a habit of fixing things that didn't belong to him. He repaired broken fences for neighbors, changed flat tires for strangers, and once spent an entire weekend helping an elderly widow rebuild her porch. I fell in love with him because he made everyone around him feel safe. We married 2 years later. Neither of us came from wealthy families. We rented a tiny apartment above a hardware store during our first years together. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained, and our heater worked only when it felt generous. But we were happy. Michael often sat beside me at our small kitchen table and unfolded drawings of houses he wanted to build one day. "Nothing fancy," he always said, "just a place where our family feels safe." When I became pregnant with Lauren, he worked extra hours for nearly a year. He accepted construction projects in neighboring towns, drove long distances, and rarely complained. Finally, in 1988, we bought a modest 2-story house on the outskirts of Columbus. It wasn't large. The kitchen was outdated. The roof needed repairs. The backyard looked more like a field than a lawn, but Michael stood in the empty living room holding our baby daughter and whispered, "This is where she'll grow up." For many years, our life felt almost ordinary. I taught literature at a local high school. Michael continued his engineering work. Lauren grew up running through the hallways, drawing pictures on the refrigerator, and falling asleep on her father's chest every Sunday afternoon. Michael adored our daughter. He attended every school play, every piano recital, every graduation ceremony. When Lauren was 10 years old, she asked him why he always took pictures of the house. He smiled. "Because someday, you'll want to remember where your life started." As parents, we made sacrifices that never appeared in family photographs. I postponed promotions. Michael delayed retirement savings. We paid for dance classes, summer camps, college preparation programs. Every dream Lauren had became our dream. When she wanted to attend an expensive university, we refinanced part of our savings. When she struggled during her freshman year, I drove 4 hours just to have dinner with her. When her first serious relationship ended, she came home and cried in my lap for hours. I truly believed we had the kind of bond that nothing could break. But life has a way of changing people slowly. So slowly that you often don't notice until years have passed. The first real change came after Michael developed heart problems. He was 61 when doctors discovered severe coronary disease. At first, he tried to hide his pain. He continued mowing the lawn, fixing gutters, repairing shelves, pretending nothing was wrong. But one evening, while carrying groceries into the kitchen, he collapsed. I still remember the sound. The bags hit the floor. An orange rolled across the room. And suddenly, our future became uncertain. The following years were filled with doctor's appointments, medications, surgeries, and long nights in hospital rooms. Lauren visited when she could. She lived several hours away by then and had begun building her own career. Michael never complained. Even during his worst days, he worried more about us than himself. One afternoon, while we sat together on the back porch, he looked toward the old maple tree he had planted when Lauren was born. "Catherine," he said quietly. I turned toward him. "If something happens to me, promise me something." I immediately became angry. "Nothing is going to happen." He smiled gently. "Promise me anyway." I nodded. He looked at the house. "Don't ever let guilt make your decisions." I didn't understand. "What does that mean?" He remained silent for several seconds. "Parents spend their whole lives giving," he said. "Sometimes they forget they're allowed to keep something for themselves." I remember laughing. "Are you worried about me becoming selfish at 65? "No." He squeezed my hand. "I'm worried about you giving away everything because you love too much." At the time, I thought the medication was making him emotional. I never imagined those words would someday save me. As Michael's health declined, he began organizing paperwork. Insurance policies, bank accounts, medical records. He spent several afternoons in his office with attorney Daniel Brooks, a lawyer we had known for years. I asked him several times what they were discussing. "Just making sure things are simple for you later," he answered. I didn't ask many questions. Perhaps I should have. Lauren visited during Thanksgiving that year. Michael watched her carefully. Not with disappointment, not with anger, just concern. After dinner, he sat beside me in our bedroom. "Lauren is changing." I looked up. "She's busy, that's all." He shook his head. "No, something's different." I defended our daughter. Every mother does. "She's growing up." He stared quietly toward the hallway. "Maybe." Then he added words I never forgot. "Love your children with your whole heart, Catherine. Just don't surrender your entire life to them." Several months later, Michael passed away in his sleep. The house became unbearably quiet. For 42 years, I had fallen asleep beside him. Suddenly, I woke alone. I stopped cooking proper meals. I stopped sitting on the back porch. Sometimes, I left his coffee mug beside the sink because washing it felt too final. Lauren attended the funeral. She cried. She held my hand. She promised she would always take care of me. At the cemetery, she hugged me and whispered, "You'll never be alone, Mom." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. For the first year after Michael's death, I survived mostly through routines. I watered the garden. I attended church. I met friends for coffee. I organized family photographs. But every room reminded me of him. His tools remained in the garage. His books sat beside his chair. His reading glasses still rested on the nightstand. One evening, I found an envelope tucked inside his desk drawer. My name was written on the front. Catherine. Inside was a short handwritten note. It said, "If you are reading this, then I wasn't able to tell you everything myself. Trust your instincts, protect your heart, and remember that this house was built to shelter you too." I cried for nearly an hour. At the bottom of the page, he had written something else. "When the time is right, speak to Daniel." At the time, I thought he was referring to financial matters. I placed the letter inside a small wooden box and stored it safely. I had no idea that years later, standing outside my own front door, In the rain, that same box would become the only thing I carried away. And I had absolutely no idea that Michael had already seen a future that I refused to imagine. The first time I met Jason Mitchell, he brought flowers. Not the inexpensive grocery store kind either. He arrived at my front door carrying a large bouquet of white lilies and introduced himself with a smile that seemed carefully practiced. "Mrs. Reed, I've heard so much about you." Lauren stood beside him, glowing. She was 32 years old, then successful, confident, and more beautiful than I had ever been at her age. After losing Michael, seeing my daughter happy felt like a gift. Jason shook my hand firmly. He worked as a financial consultant in Cincinnati, wore expensive suits, and drove a black luxury sedan that looked completely out of place in my driveway. At first I liked him. He opened doors. He helped wash dishes. He called me Catherine only after asking permission. Most importantly, he made Lauren laugh. For the first several months, I convinced myself that my husband would have approved. But Michael had always been better at reading people than I was. The first uncomfortable moment happened during Thanksgiving. Jason was helping me prepare dinner while Lauren decorated the dining table. He looked around the kitchen. "This house has incredible potential." I smiled politely. "It has good memories." He nodded. "An excellent value." At first, I thought nothing of it. He worked in finance. Numbers probably came naturally to him, but over the following year, the conversations slowly changed. Whenever Jason visited, he asked questions. "When was the roof replaced? Have you ever had the house appraised? Property values in this neighborhood must be rising. How much land comes with the property?" They seemed like harmless questions, yet something about them unsettled me. Michael had never spoken about our home that way. To him, the house had been a family. To Jason, it sounded like an investment. Lauren and Jason married 18 months after they met. The wedding took place at a beautiful country club outside Columbus. I paid for much of it. Michael's life insurance had helped cover some expenses, and I wanted my daughter to have the wedding she had always imagined. Lauren cried during the father-daughter tribute. She held Michael's photograph. Everyone in the room cried with her. Jason comforted her. I remember thinking that perhaps I had worried unnecessarily. Perhaps this young man truly loved my daughter. After the honeymoon, they returned to Cincinnati. For a while, life seemed normal. We spoke every Sunday. Lauren called to discuss work problems, recipes, movies, her plans to start a family someday. But gradually, those calls became shorter. Sometimes she canceled. Sometimes she forgot. Weeks would pass without hearing from her. I told myself this was natural. Children build their own lives. Parents learn to let go. Still, the silence hurt. One afternoon, I drove to Cincinnati to surprise her for her birthday. I brought homemade cookies and a quilt I had finished sewing. When I arrived, Lauren seemed happy to see me. Jason, however, appeared distracted. During dinner, he spoke almost entirely about investments, real estate markets, and economic forecasts. Then he looked at me. "So, what are your plans for the future, Catherine?" I laughed. "Survive retirement." "No, I mean long-term." "I'm not sure." "Will you eventually sell the house?" Lauren immediately looked uncomfortable. "Jason?" "What?" he said. "It's a reasonable question." I answered carefully. "I haven't thought about it." He nodded. "Large houses become difficult to maintain." Lauren added softly, "You don't have to live there forever, Mom." I remember driving home that evening with a strange heaviness in my chest. For the first time, I felt like my home had become a topic of discussion rather than simply the place where I lived. Months passed. Lauren changed in ways that were difficult to describe. She became more practical, more impatient. She spoke frequently about money, investments, retirement planning, assets. Sometimes I wondered whether Jason's profession had influenced her. One afternoon, she called me. "Mom, have you updated your will?" I nearly dropped the phone. "Why are you asking?" "I was just thinking about making sure everything is organized." "I'm healthy." "I know." There was an awkward silence. Then she laughed. "Jason says people avoid these conversations too long." I changed the subject. After we hung up, I sat quietly at my kitchen table. Michael's words returned to me. "Don't let guilt make your decisions." I still didn't fully understand why he had said them. Christmas that year felt different. Lauren and Jason arrived late. They argued quietly in the kitchen. Jason spent much of the evening answering work emails. After dinner, he walked through the house. He examined the basement, the garage, the backyard, almost like a buyer inspecting a property. At one point, he stood beside Michael's old workshop. "This space could be renovated beautifully." I smiled weakly. It was Michael's favorite room. Jason nodded. "Still, it could add significant value." Later that night, after they had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The Christmas tree lights reflected softly against the windows. I looked at Michael's photograph, and for the first time, I wished he were there to tell me whether my concerns were foolish. Several months later, Lauren announced that she and Jason were considering moving closer to Columbus. "The housing market is terrible right now," she explained. "Houses are expensive." I sympathized. Young couples often struggle financially. Then she said something that stayed with me. "Honestly, someday the house will be mine anyway." She said it casually, almost jokingly. But I felt something inside me tighten. I forced a smile. "Someday is hopefully very far away." She immediately apologized. "Mom, that's not what I meant." "I know." But the conversation left me unsettled. I began noticing other small things. Jason asking whether the mortgage had been paid off. Lauren wondering where important documents were stored. Questions about insurance, property taxes, bank accounts. Perhaps none of it meant anything. Perhaps I was simply becoming an overly sensitive widow. Yet Michael had noticed something before he died, and now I was beginning to see it too. One Sunday afternoon, my neighbor Linda Hayes came over for coffee. She had known our family for 30 years. She listened quietly while I spoke. "I feel guilty even saying these things." Linda stirred her coffee. "Your instincts exist for a reason." "I don't want to think badly about my own daughter." "You don't have to." She looked directly at me. "But you should pay attention." That evening, I opened Michael's desk drawer again. The small wooden box remained exactly where I had placed it. Inside was his letter. I read the final lines. "Protect your heart. Speak to Daniel." For some reason, I almost called attorney Daniel Brooks that night. Almost. Instead, I put the letter away. I convinced myself that families go through difficult periods, that daughters become busy, that sons-in-law sometimes ask uncomfortable questions. I still believed love would fix everything. I still believed Lauren was the same little girl who used to run through this house with scraped knees and tangled hair. I had no idea that within a year, my daughter would stand in that same living room and tell me I no longer belonged there. And I had absolutely no idea that Jason had already begun making plans for a house that was never his to claim. About 8 months after Christmas, Lauren called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was trimming roses in the backyard when my phone rang. "Mom, are you busy?" There was something unusually warm in her voice, something I hadn't heard in months. "Not at all." She hesitated. Jason's voice echoed somewhere in the background. Then she said, We were wondering if you would consider letting us move in for a while. I sat down slowly on the porch steps. Move in. Just temporarily. She quickly explained that Jason's company was restructuring. His office had reduced bonuses and the housing market in Columbus had become difficult. They wanted to save money, search for better opportunities, and spend more time together as a family. We hate being so far away from you, she said. My heart immediately softened. For nearly 2 years, I had felt my daughter slipping away from me. Now she was asking to come home. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I heard Michael's voice reminding me that family mattered. When would you move? I asked. Lauren sounded relieved. Really, you'd let us? Of course. She began crying. Thank you, Mom. For the first time in a very long time, I felt needed again. Over the next several weeks, I prepared the house. I cleaned bedrooms, bought fresh linens, painted the guest room. I even reopened Michael's old workshop because Jason had mentioned he enjoyed woodworking. When they arrived in early September, the house felt alive again. Boxes filled the hallway. Lauren laughed as she unpacked dishes. Jason carried furniture into the garage. For a few days, everything seemed wonderful. We ate dinner together, watched television, shared old family photographs. Lauren sat beside me in the evenings exactly as she had when she was young. I convinced myself that our family had been repaired. But changes began appearing almost immediately. Small things at first. Jason moved furniture without asking. He rearranged the living room. He removed several family photographs because they made the room feel dated. He suggested replacing Michael's old recliner. This room needs to feel more modern. I smiled politely. Michael loved that chair. Jason nodded. But nobody sits in it anymore. The chair stayed. Still, I noticed something. Jason spoke about the house as if he were improving it for the future. Not for me, not for us, for something else. Lauren slowly began agreeing with him. We could brighten this kitchen. The carpets are old. The wallpaper should go. At first, I appreciated their help. The house did need repairs, but over time I realized very little of my opinion was being requested. One afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping and found several framed photographs removed from the hallway. Pictures of Michael, our wedding portraits, Lauren's childhood photographs. They sat stacked carefully against a wall. What's happening? I asked. Lauren smiled. We're redecorating. I picked up one of the frames. This picture was your father's favorite. We'll put it somewhere else. Somewhere else. The words hurt more than I expected. A few weeks later, Jason began discussing finances. At breakfast, after dinner, during television commercials. He spoke about retirement investments, estate planning, tax advantages. One evening, he looked at me directly. Catherine, have you ever considered creating a living trust? I nearly dropped my coffee cup. No. It protects families. I'm not worried. He smiled. Most people wait too long. Lauren immediately joined the conversation. Jason handles these things all the time. I nodded. I understand. But I didn't continue the discussion. That night, I lay awake. Michael's side of the bed remained empty, as it had for years. I looked toward his photograph on the dresser. For some reason, I suddenly missed him with an almost physical ache. He would have known what to say. He would have understood why I felt uncomfortable even when nothing obviously wrong had happened. Another month passed. Then something occurred that truly frightened me. I kept important documents in a locked drawer inside my bedroom dresser. Insurance papers, bank information, property tax records, Michael's documents. The key remained inside my jewelry box. One afternoon, I opened the drawer and immediately knew someone had touched the papers. Nothing was missing, but the folders had been rearranged. Several envelopes had been opened. A property tax statement sat upside down. I stood there for several minutes. Perhaps I had done it myself. Perhaps I had forgotten. Yet something felt wrong. That evening, I casually asked Lauren, "Did you need something from my room?" She looked surprised. "No." "What about Jason?" She shook her head. "Why?" I forced a smile. "Oh, I couldn't find some papers." Later that night, I noticed Jason studying me across the dinner table. Not angrily, carefully, as though he knew something I did not. Around this time, my neighbor Linda began visiting less frequently. Not because she wanted to, because Jason made her uncomfortable. One afternoon, she pulled me aside. "Catherine, are you all right?" "Of course." She lowered her voice. "Your son-in-law asked me whether you plan to move into assisted living." I stared at her. He said he was concerned about your future." I felt cold. I had never discussed assisted living with anyone. I was healthy, independent, still driving, still volunteering. Why would he ask such a question? That evening, I decided to speak with Lauren privately. We sat together on the back porch, where Michael and I had spent so many evenings. "Are you and Jason worried about me?" She looked confused. "What do you mean? Has he mentioned assisted living?" Her expression changed slightly. "Oh." "Lauren," she avoided my eyes. "He was just talking about long-term planning. I'm 67, not 90. "I know." "Then why discuss moving me somewhere?" She sighed. "Mom, you're taking this personally." "I think I have the right." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that hurt me deeply. "Jason is just trying to help organize things." Things. Not my life, not my future. Things. A few days later, I entered the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Jason and Lauren were talking quietly. Neither had noticed me. "If the paperwork is already organized, everything becomes easier," Jason said. Lauren answered softly, "I know. Eventually the house will belong to you anyway." I froze. Lauren didn't respond immediately. Then she said something I wish I had never heard. "I just don't want Mom to think we're waiting." My chest tightened. Waiting. Waiting for what? For me to leave. For me to die. I quietly returned upstairs before they saw me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened Michael's wooden box again. His letter rested inside. "Protect your heart." I finally understood why those words frightened me. The following morning, I called my old friend Evelyn Parker. We met for coffee. I told her everything: the conversations, the paperwork, the feeling that I no longer recognized my own home. Evelyn listened carefully. Then she asked one simple question. "Catherine, when was the last time someone asked what you wanted?" I couldn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. When I returned home that afternoon, I discovered that Jason had changed the lock on the garage door. "Oh," he said casually. "The old one wasn't secure." He handed me a new key. For the first time in 40 years, I needed permission to enter part of my own house. And standing there, with that unfamiliar key in my hand, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt like a guest in my own home. The dinner that changed everything happened on a cold Thursday evening in November. By then, Lauren and Jason had been living in my house for nearly 3 months. 3 months of small changes. 3 months of quiet discomfort. 3 months of convincing myself that family simply required patience. That afternoon, Lauren told me she wanted us to have a special dinner together. Just the three of us, she said. She cooked my favorite chicken casserole. Jason brought home a bottle of wine. The dining room candles were lit. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps things were finally improving. Lauren smiled more than usual. Jason appeared unusually relaxed. He even asked me questions about my years as a teacher. We laughed. We shared stories about Michael. For the first time in months, the house felt almost normal. Then dinner ended. Jason stood up and walked into the living room. When he returned, he carried a leather folder. My stomach immediately tightened. He placed the folder on the table. Lauren reached for my hand. "Mom, don't be upset." I looked from one face to the other. "Upset about what?" Jason opened the folder. Inside were several documents. "These are simply precautionary papers." I didn't touch them. "What kind of papers?" Lauren spoke softly. "We've been worried about you." "I'm sitting right here." Jason gave a small laugh. "Of course, but life is unpredictable." I stared at the documents. "Explain." He slid the first page toward me. "It would allow us to help manage things if you ever became sick." I adjusted my glasses. The words on the page suddenly became very clear. Durable power of attorney. My heartbeat slowed. I turned another page. Property management authorization. Financial access authorization. Medical decision authority. I looked up. "Who prepared these?" Jason answered. "A colleague." I looked directly at Lauren. "You knew about this." She nodded. "We just want to protect you." I closed the folder. "I don't need protection." Jason remained calm. "Catherine, nobody expects anything to happen." "Then why do you need control over my finances?" "It's temporary." "I didn't ask for it." Lauren sighed. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." Those words struck me harder than I expected. Difficult, as though I had become a problem to solve. I opened the folder again. One section discussed management of assets. Another referred to real property. My eyes stopped. Real property. The house. I looked at Jason. "This includes the house." He leaned back in his chair. "It's standard language." "No." I placed the paper on the table. "This gives you authority." Lauren's voice became sharper. "Only if something happens." "I'm perfectly healthy." Jason folded his hands. "Catherine, we're thinking ahead." "No, you're planning ahead." Silence filled the room. The clock in the kitchen ticked loudly. Outside wind rattled the windows. Lauren suddenly stood up. "Why are you acting like we're trying to hurt you?" I looked at my daughter. Because for the first time in my life, I truly didn't recognize her. "I'm acting like someone who was handed legal documents during dinner." She crossed her arms. "We've sacrificed a lot to move here." "I never asked you to." Jason intervened. "Nobody is attacking anyone." I looked at him. "Then why wasn't I involved in these decisions?" His expression hardened slightly. "We were trying to help. By obtaining authority over my property. It's only paperwork." "No, Jason, it's my life." Lauren slammed her hand against the table. "You don't trust us." The words echoed through the dining room. I answered honestly. "At this moment, no." She stared at me as though I had insulted her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Jason quietly gathered the papers. "Maybe this was a mistake." I nodded. "Yes." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "You think we're greedy." I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect her feelings, but Michael's words suddenly returned. Don't let guilt make your decisions. So I answered carefully. I think you're asking for something I am not ready to give. Jason stood. We've spent months helping around this house. I appreciate that. We've paid expenses. I appreciate that too. His voice became colder. But apparently, none of it matters. I stood as well. This is my home. He looked directly into my eyes. And someday, it won't be. The room became completely silent. Lauren immediately looked at him. Jason? But he continued. We're family, Catherine. Yes. Then why are you acting like strangers? I took a slow breath. Because strangers don't usually ask for ownership rights over dinner. Lauren began crying, real tears. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap after nightmares. Mom, we're trying to build a future. I softened. I understand. She shook her head. No, you don't. I sat back down. Then explain. She looked exhausted. We moved here because we thought we could all help each other. And we can. But it feels like you don't want us here. The statement stunned me. For months, I had given up privacy, space, routine, control over my own house, and somehow I had become the selfish one. I opened my home to you. Jason answered quietly. And now we're trying to protect it. Protect it. Not protect you. Protect it. The distinction frightened me. The argument continued for nearly an hour. Voices rose, accusations surfaced, old frustrations emerged. Lauren claimed I resisted change. Jason said I was emotional. I said they were pressuring me. Eventually, Lauren asked the question I had been dreading. What happens to the house after you're gone? I looked directly at her. I haven't made those decisions. She appeared shocked. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. Jason spoke carefully. You don't have a will? I didn't say that. Lauren stared. Mom. What? She swallowed. I thought Dad left everything to us. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Everything. Us, I thought about Michael. His meetings with Daniel. His warnings. His concerns. Suddenly, I realized something. Neither Lauren nor Jason actually knew anything. They assumed, and perhaps those assumptions had been guiding every conversation for years. I stood up. I'm tired. Lauren followed me. Mom, please. I looked at her. The little girl I raised still existed somewhere behind those frightened eyes, but another person stood there too, a woman who had begun counting possessions before losses. I love you, I said quietly. Then trust me. I shook my head. Trust is not given because we're family. It's built. I walked upstairs. For nearly 2 hours, I sat beside Michael's old desk. The house remained silent. Finally, I opened the wooden box. Inside lay his letter. And beneath the letter, for the first time in years, I noticed another envelope. Smaller. Sealed. My name written in Michael's handwriting. I stared at it. I almost opened it. But something stopped me. Instead, I placed it back into the box. Downstairs, I could hear Lauren and Jason talking quietly, arguing, whispering, planning. And for the first time since they had moved into my home, I felt certain of one thing. this argument wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. After the argument at dinner, the house changed. Not suddenly, not loudly. It changed the way winter arrives in Ohio slowly, quietly, until one morning you wake up and realize all the warmth is gone. For several days, Lauren barely spoke to me. She still prepared coffee. She still said good morning, but the softness in her voice had disappeared. Jason became even more polite, which somehow felt worse. He smiled. He asked about my day. He offered to carry groceries. Yet every conversation felt rehearsed, as though we had become co-workers sharing the same building instead of family. I spent more time in my bedroom. Sometimes I sat beside Michael's photograph for hours. The house no longer felt like mine. The television volume downstairs, the unfamiliar furniture, the constant discussions about renovations. Everything reminded me that I had become a guest. One Sunday morning, I attended church alone. After the service, several women from my Bible group invited me to lunch. Normally, I would have joined them. Instead, I drove home because I felt guilty leaving Lauren and Jason by themselves. I still believed I could fix things. As I walked through the front door, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. They didn't know I was home. Jason was speaking. We can't keep waiting forever. Lauren answered quietly. She's my mother. And she's healthy. Exactly. There was silence. Then Jason spoke again. At some point, you have to think about your future. I stopped moving. My purse hung from my shoulder. My heart began beating harder. Lauren sounded tired. I know. We moved here because we believed this would become our home. It will. When? Neither of them spoke. I quietly stepped outside again and sat inside my car. For almost 20 minutes, I couldn't start the engine. Our home. Not her mother's home. Not our family home. Their home. That evening, Lauren noticed something was wrong. Mom, are you okay? I looked at her. Do you want this house? She froze. What? The house. Why are you asking me that? Because I heard your conversation. Jason immediately entered the room. What conversation? The one about waiting. Lauren's face became pale. You misunderstood. Then explain. Jason crossed his arms. Catherine, this isn't helping. No. Tell me what I misunderstood. Lauren sat down. Tears filled her eyes. I just want stability. You have stability. We're struggling financially. I looked toward Jason. He looked away. It was the first time anyone had admitted it. What kind of struggles? Jason answered. Temporary setbacks. Meaning, my company reduced clients. How much debt? Lauren whispered. Mom! But I continued. How much? Jason's jaw tightened. That isn't your concern. I almost laughed. My house had become their concern. Their finances, apparently, were not mine. That night, nobody ate dinner. The following week became unbearable. Doors closed harder. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Lauren spent most evenings in her bedroom. Jason worked constantly on his laptop. One afternoon, I entered the garage and discovered several real estate brochures on a workbench. Property values, home equity loans, refinancing options. I picked one up. Someone had circled several paragraphs. Homeowners over 65 often fail to maximize equity. I stood there staring. Jason entered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Those are work materials." I placed the brochure down. Are you planning something? No. Then why are these here? He sighed. Catherine, you assume the worst about me. And you avoid answering questions. His face hardened. I've done nothing but help this family. This family doesn't need to be managed. No. His voice rose slightly. Your daughter is worried. About me or the house? He looked directly into my eyes. About the future. I left the garage without answering. That night, I called Evelyn. I cried for the first time since Michael died. I don't understand what's happening. Evelyn listened quietly. What do you want to do? I want my daughter back. And if she doesn't come back, I couldn't answer. Because no mother wants to imagine losing her child while both of them are still alive. Several days later, everything exploded. It was raining heavily, the kind of cold November rain that turns the sky almost black. Lauren and Jason had been arguing all afternoon. I could hear them upstairs. Around 6 o'clock, Lauren came into the kitchen. Her eyes were red. Jason lost another client. I'm sorry. She sat down. For a moment, she looked like my daughter again. Small, tired, scared. I reached for her hand. She pulled away. Mom, why can't you trust us? I felt my own exhaustion rising. Why can't you accept no... Her expression changed. You think we're after your money. I think you've asked questions no daughter should ask. And what does that mean? It means you've been planning my future without me. Jason walked into the room. We're not doing this again. Lauren stood. No, let's do it. She looked directly at me. If Dad were alive, he'd help us. The words hit me like a slap. You don't know what your father would do. Yes, I do. No, Lauren. She shook her head. He wanted this family together. He wanted us to love each other. We do. I stared at her. Do we... Silence. The rain beat against the windows. Jason spoke quietly. Catherine, maybe this arrangement isn't working. I looked at him. What does that mean? It means perhaps everyone would be happier separately. I felt cold. This is my house. He answered without hesitation. And we're living here too. Lauren suddenly exploded. I'm tired of feeling like visitors. I stared at her. Visitors? This has never felt like our home. The words shocked me. Our home. She began crying. We gave up everything to come here. I didn't ask you to. You needed us. No. The room became completely silent. For years after Michael died, I had been afraid of saying those words. No, I don't need saving. I don't need managing. I don't need permission. Lauren looked wounded. After everything we've done, what exactly have you done? Her breathing became uneven. We've taken care of you. I was taking care of myself. Jason stepped forward. Catherine. No. I looked at both of them. This is my home. Then Lauren said the words that changed everything. Maybe it shouldn't be. I couldn't speak. She wiped tears from her face. If you don't trust us, then maybe you should leave. I thought I had misunderstood. Leave. Jason remained silent. Lauren's voice trembled. I'm serious. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I had raised, the child whose fevers I had sat beside, whose college tuition I had paid, whose heartbreaks I had comforted. And suddenly, I saw a stranger. Outside, thunder rolled. The rain intensified. I slowly walked upstairs. Neither of them followed. Inside my bedroom, I opened Michael's wooden box. His letter. The sealed envelope. several documents. I placed everything carefully inside. Then I took my purse. When I came downstairs, Lauren stood near the front door. Her eyes were swollen. Jason stood behind her. I waited. I wanted someone to stop me, someone to say this had gone too far. Nobody did. I reached for my coat. Lauren finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost emotionless. "You're homeless now, Mom." The words cut deeper than grief, deeper than widowhood, deeper than loss. Because grief comes from death. This pain came from the living. I opened the front door. Cold rain immediately struck my face. At that moment, my neighbor Linda pulled into her driveway. She saw me standing there. She saw the suitcase. She saw my daughter. "Catherine," I couldn't answer. I stepped onto the porch. The wooden box remained in my arms. Behind me stood the house I had spent 40 years building. Inside stood my daughter, and neither of them realized that the woman walking into the rain still carried the one secret Michael had protected all along. The rain continued for most of the night. I sat inside Linda Hayes's car with Michael's wooden box resting on my lap, while the windshield wipers moved back and forth like a clock counting down the end of my old life. Linda kept glancing at me. "Catherine, you're freezing." Only then did I realize my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from shock. 40 years. 40 years inside that house. 40 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school projects, family dinners, arguments, laughter, grief, and love. And now I was sitting in a neighbor's car because my daughter had told me I was homeless. Linda drove me to Evelyn Parker's house. Evelyn had been my closest friend for more than 30 years. We had taught at the same school, survived difficult marriages together, buried our husbands within 2 years of each other, and shared enough coffee to fill a swimming pool. She opened the front door wearing her robe. The moment she saw me standing there with wet hair and a suitcase, her face turned pale. "Catherine!" I could not speak. Evelyn immediately wrapped her arms around me. "Oh my God!" I finally began crying. Not the quiet tears I had shed after Michael died, not the tears of loneliness. These were the tears of humiliation, the tears of a mother whose own child had shut the door behind her. Evelyn helped me inside. Linda briefly explained what had happened. Evelyn looked stunned. "Lauren did this." I nodded. "No, she did." "And Jason?" I gave a bitter smile. He watched. The three of us sat in the kitchen until almost midnight. Neither woman pushed me. Neither woman offered advice. Sometimes kindness means simply allowing another person to fall apart. Eventually, Linda went home. Evelyn prepared tea. The house became quiet. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question everyone had avoided. "What exactly happened?" I told her everything. The move, the documents, the arguments, the conversations about the house, the power of attorney, the pressure. And finally, the words. "You're homeless now." Evelyn stared at me in disbelief. "I don't understand, Lauren." "Neither do I." "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the wooden box. For years, it had sat untouched inside Michael's desk. For years, I had avoided opening it because it felt too painful. Tonight, it felt different. Almost necessary. "I think Michael knew something." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" I carried the box into the living room. The old brass latch clicked softly. Inside lay Michael's letter. The smaller sealed envelope, several legal folders, and a key. A small silver key I had never noticed before. Evelyn sat beside me. "Have you looked through these?" "Not really." My hands trembled as I opened the first folder. Inside were documents with attorney Daniel Brooks's name. Trust agreements, property documents, legal records. I wasn't sure what any of it meant. Then I found Michael's letter again. The same letter I had read after his death. This time, I read it aloud. "If you are reading this, then I wasn't able to tell you everything myself. Trust your instincts. Protect your heart. Remember that this house was built to shelter you too. At the bottom, when the time is right, speak to Daniel." Evelyn looked at me. "Catherine, why didn't you call him?" "I don't know. Perhaps because I didn't want to believe Michael had been worried. Perhaps because I didn't want to imagine my daughter becoming someone capable of hurting me. Perhaps because mothers spend years protecting their children, even from truths they need to hear." Then I looked at the smaller envelope. My name appeared in Michael's handwriting. Catherine. Nothing else. The seal had never been broken. I hesitated. Evelyn touched my hand. "Maybe it's time." Very carefully, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Michael's handwriting was weaker than usual, clearly written during his illness. I began reading. "My dear Catherine, if you are opening this letter, then something has happened that forced you to finally look inside this box. If I know you, you probably waited far too long." I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like him. "You love with your whole heart. That is one of the reasons I married you. But it is also the reason I worry about you. Please remember something. You are not responsible for every decision our daughter makes. You are not required to sacrifice your dignity to prove your love. And you are not alone." My vision blurred. Evelyn quietly handed me a tissue. I continued reading. "I have made arrangements to protect you. Daniel understands everything. Trust him. The house was never meant to become a burden or a reward. It was meant to remain your home for as long as you need it. If Lauren remains kind and loving, she will someday understand my choices. If she does not, then my decisions will protect you. Love always, Michael." The room became silent. I read the letter again and again. Protect you. My decisions. Daniel understands. Evelyn looked at me. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." But for the first time since leaving my house, something inside me changed. Fear became confusion. Confusion became curiosity, because Michael had never done anything carelessly. If he had taken legal steps, there had to be a reason. Evelyn poured more tea. "What if Michael saw something before you did?" I thought about the conversations he had with Lauren during his final year, the concerns he expressed, his warnings, his words about guilt. Perhaps he had seen changes that I refused to see. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I finally went to the guest room. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lauren standing in the doorway. "You're homeless now." The words repeated endlessly. Near sunrise, my phone vibrated. Lauren. For several seconds, I stared at the screen. Then I answered. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Mom?" "Yes." She sounded exhausted. "Where are you?" "Safe." "I'm sorry." My heart immediately softened. She was still my daughter, no matter what had happened. But then I heard Jason's voice in the background. "Ask her when she's coming back." Lauren became quiet. I suddenly understood. The apology wasn't simple. Nothing was simple anymore. I'm staying with Evelyn. Another pause. Can we talk later? Maybe. Catherine? It was Jason. I closed my eyes. We all need some time. He spoke carefully. We don't want this to get worse. Worse, as though being thrown out of my own house wasn't already enough. I ended the call. When Evelyn woke up, I was sitting at the kitchen table. The documents lay spread in front of me. The trust papers, the letters, the notes, and one business card. Attorney Daniel Brooks. I stared at the card for a long time. Michael had trusted him. Michael had prepared something, and suddenly I realized something that sent a chill through me. During every argument, every discussion, every conversation about ownership, Lauren and Jason had spoken as though the house already belonged to them. But neither of them had ever actually seen the documents. Neither of them had ever spoken to Daniel. Neither of them knew what Michael had done. For the first time since I walked into the rain, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt hope. And the next morning, I decided it was finally time to call Daniel Brooks. I called Daniel Brooks at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. His receptionist answered immediately. Law offices of Daniel Brooks. My name is Catherine Reed. There was a brief pause. Then the woman said something unexpected. Mrs. Reed, Mr. Brooks has asked that if you ever called, you should be put through immediately. My heart skipped. A moment later, I heard Daniel's familiar voice. Catherine. He sounded neither surprised nor confused, only sad. It's been a long time, he said. Yes. I suppose Michael's box has finally been opened. I closed my eyes. How did you know? There was silence. Then he answered. Because Michael believed someday you would need it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I suddenly realized that my husband had planned for this conversation years ago. Daniel invited me to his office that afternoon. Evelyn insisted on driving me. During the entire trip to downtown Columbus, I held Michael's letters in my lap. I felt nervous. Part of me still hoped this was all some misunderstanding. Part of me wanted Daniel to tell me that Michael had simply organized paperwork. Nothing more, nothing serious. But deep inside, I already knew. Michael had seen something. Perhaps before any of us. Daniel's office had not changed in 20 years. The same dark wood shelves, the same framed degrees, the same grandfather clock standing beside the window. Daniel himself had grown older. His hair had become silver, his shoulders slightly bent, but his eyes remained kind. The moment he saw me, he stood. Catherine. I embraced him, and suddenly I began crying again. Not because of Lauren, not because of the house, because someone else besides Michael had known. And for years, I had never asked. Daniel led us into his office. Evelyn sat beside me. He opened a large file cabinet. Then he removed several folders. Each one had Michael's handwriting. My husband's name, my husband's signature. My husband had prepared all of this while he was dying. Daniel sat down. Before we discuss anything, I want to ask one question. I nodded. Have Lauren and Jason seen any of these documents? No. Good. The word surprised me. Good. Daniel folded his hands. Michael loved your daughter very much. I know. He also worried about her. I looked down. So he told you? Daniel nodded. Several times. What exactly worried him? Daniel hesitated. He believed Lauren had begun viewing the house differently. I felt my chest tighten. He said that, yes. Daniel opened one folder. Inside was a legal trust agreement. The property was transferred several years before Michael died. I stared at him. Transferred into a family trust. My hands began shaking. I don't understand. Daniel adjusted his glasses. Michael created the Reed Family Trust. I looked at the papers. The words meant nothing to me. Daniel continued. You are the sole controlling trustee. I blinked. What does that mean? It means you control the house. I swallowed. The house is mine? Yes. The room became silent. Daniel continued, speaking gently. The property cannot be sold, borrowed against transferred, refinanced, or inherited without the trust conditions being met. I stared at him. But Lauren believes. Lauren does not know. I could barely breathe. For years, I had assumed Michael left everything to me through a simple will. But he had done much more. He had protected me. Daniel opened another document. Michael specifically instructed me not to discuss these matters unless you requested it, or unless circumstances required it. I thought about the rain. The front door. You're homeless now. Apparently, circumstances had arrived. Evelyn finally spoke. What are the conditions? Daniel looked at me. Are you sure you want to hear this? I nodded. He slid one page across the desk. Michael's signature appeared at the bottom. The document stated that after Catherine Reed's lifetime, the property could pass to Lauren Mitchell, only if certain family provisions had been honored. My eyes stopped. One sentence. The beneficiary must maintain a loving and supportive relationship with Catherine Reed and shall not attempt coercion, financial pressure, or removal of her residence rights. I looked up. Michael had anticipated everything. Everything. My vision blurred. He wrote this. Daniel nodded. He was very specific. I remembered Michael sitting beside me on the porch. Don't let guilt make your decisions. He already knew. Perhaps not exactly, but enough. I wiped my eyes. What happens now? Daniel became serious. Now we discuss Jason. The room suddenly felt colder. What about him? Daniel opened another folder. Approximately 6 months ago, someone contacted my office asking questions about the property. I frowned. Who? Jason Mitchell. My heart stopped. He called you? Several times. And I refused to provide information. What did he want? Daniel looked directly at me. He wanted to know whether the house had already been transferred to Lauren. I couldn't speak. Evelyn looked furious. When was this? Months before they moved into the house. The room fell silent. Everything suddenly looked different. The move, the conversations, the questions, the paperwork, the discussions about my future, the pressure. How long had this been happening? How much of their decision to move home had been about me? How much had been about the house? Daniel continued. Several weeks ago, someone also requested copies of public property records. Jason, I can't prove it. But you suspect it. He nodded. I felt physically ill. For months I had blamed myself. I thought I was becoming suspicious, paranoid, sensitive. Instead, Michael had been right. And my instincts had been right. Daniel leaned forward. Catherine, I need to ask another question. I nodded. Did anyone ask you to sign documents? I immediately thought of the dinner, the power of attorney, the financial authorizations. Yes. What kind? I described everything. Daniel's expression became very serious. Do you still have those papers? No. He nodded slowly. That concerns me. Why? Because if Jason prepared those documents himself, he may have been attempting to gain authority over trust assets. The words frightened me. Was that illegal? Potentially. My head began spinning. This was no longer simply a family disagreement. Something else was happening. Something Michael had feared. Daniel opened one final folder. Inside was a letter, written entirely by Michael. He handed it to me. I was instructed to give you this only if your residence rights were ever threatened. My hands trembled. Michael's handwriting filled the page. My dearest Catherine, if Daniel is giving you this letter, then something has happened that I hoped would never happen. Please remember this. You are not homeless. You are not powerless, and you are not alone. This house belongs to the life we built together. No one can take it from you. No one. I broke down completely. For years after Michael died, I had felt abandoned by life. Now I realized he had never truly left. He had been protecting me all along. Daniel allowed me several minutes. Finally, he said quietly, Catherine, legally speaking, you remain fully protected. I looked up. What do I do now? He folded his hands. For now, you rest. And Lauren, we will deal with Lauren later. And Jason, his expression hardened for the first time. If Jason has done what I think he may have done, then he has made a very serious mistake. As Evelyn drove me home that evening, I stared out the window. For the first time since standing in the rain, I no longer felt like a homeless woman. I felt like a wife who had finally discovered the last gift her husband left behind. And somewhere across town, Lauren and Jason still believed they had won. Neither of them had any idea that Michael Reed had already written the ending years ago. The following week was the first time I drove past my own house. Evelyn was taking me to the grocery store when we passed my neighborhood. I had not planned to look, but my eyes automatically searched for the familiar white porch the maple tree Michael had planted, and the kitchen window where I had spent thousands of mornings drinking coffee. What I saw made my stomach turn. The front porch furniture was gone. The old flower pots I had cared for every spring had disappeared, and parked in the driveway was a moving truck. Stop the car. Evelyn looked at me. Catherine, please. She pulled to the side of the road. I stared at the house. Workers were carrying furniture inside. Several pieces belonged to Lauren and Jason, but other items were new. A large dining table, boxes, decorations. The front curtains had already been replaced. It looked as if someone was erasing my life. Evelyn touched my arm. You don't have to watch this, but I couldn't look away. 40 years, and it had taken less than 2 weeks to remove my presence. That evening, Linda Hayes called. Catherine, I need to tell you something. Her voice sounded uneasy. What happened? Lauren and Jason had people over last night. I felt my chest tighten. What kind of people? I don't know. Friends, maybe? She hesitated. And Lauren told everyone that you decided to leave. I closed my eyes. What exactly did she say? Linda sighed. She said living alone had become too difficult for you. I didn't answer, because the lie hurt almost as much as being thrown out. According to Lauren, I had chosen to leave. According to Lauren, they had generously opened their home to me. According to Lauren, everything was normal. The next morning, Daniel called. I need to ask you something. Of course. Have you given anyone permission to refinance the property? I sat up. No. Any permission to use the house as collateral? No. He became very quiet. Catherine, I received a call from a local bank. My heartbeat accelerated. Why? Someone recently submitted preliminary paperwork involving the property. I gripped the phone. Who? We don't know yet. But I have a strong suspicion. My hands began trembling. Jason, I can't prove it. The room suddenly felt cold. He wouldn't. Daniel did not answer immediately. People under financial pressure make poor decisions. After the call ended, I sat in silence. The trust, the power of attorney, the conversations about value, the questions about ownership. Everything suddenly fit together. Perhaps this had never been about caring for me. Perhaps it had always been about the house. That afternoon, Evelyn drove me to the bank Daniel had mentioned. We met privately with a manager named Susan Reynolds. She greeted me kindly. Mrs. Reed, thank you for coming. She opened a file. I want to be very careful about what I say. I nodded. She slid a document across the desk. I immediately recognized my address. My house. This was submitted during a preliminary inquiry. I looked closer. There was no completed loan, no approval, no final application. But there were notes, questions about equity, estimated value, ownership. My eyes stopped. Applicant Jason Mitchell. I felt sick. Susan spoke gently. The process did not continue. Why? There were ownership concerns. What concerns? She hesitated. The information provided did not match public records. I looked up. What information? We cannot discuss everything. Daniel leaned forward. Did the applicant claim family ownership? Susan nodded. Yes. I closed my eyes. Jason had actually attempted it. He had gone to a bank. He had discussed my house, without my knowledge, without my permission, and perhaps worst of all, without even knowing who legally controlled the property. As we left the bank, I could barely speak. Evelyn drove quietly. Finally, she said, Catherine, this isn't your fault. I know. But the truth was more complicated. I felt guilty. Guilty for not seeing. Guilty for ignoring Michael's warnings. Guilty for believing love alone could protect families. That evening, my phone rang. Lauren. I stared at her name for nearly a minute. Then I answered. Mom! Her voice sounded strangely cheerful. Hello? How are you? I almost laughed. How was I? I had been thrown out of my own home. My daughter was living inside it. Her husband had apparently taken my address to a bank, yet somehow she was asking about my well-being. I'm fine. There was silence. Then she said, I've been thinking. About what? Maybe we all said things we didn't mean. I waited. I don't want us fighting. Neither do I. But I didn't say it. Instead, I asked, did Jason go to a bank? The silence that followed answered the question. Mom, did he was just exploring options. For my house? Our house? The words hit me immediately. Our house. Not your house, not your father's house. Our house. I spoke very quietly. It isn't your house. Lauren sounded frustrated. You know what I mean. No, Lauren, I don't. She sighed. Jason was trying to help us. Help who? Our family. I closed my eyes. For years, I had defined family through sacrifice. But lately, every conversation seemed to revolve around ownership, value, equity, future, assets. Not love, not grief, not Michael, not us, only the house. Lauren spoke again. We've put money into the house. I never asked you to. We live there. I answered carefully. I lived there for 40 years. The line became quiet. Finally, she asked the question. Mom, did Dad leave the house to you? My heart skipped. She still didn't know. Neither of them knew. I could almost hear Jason somewhere nearby, listening, waiting. I answered honestly. Your father made his decisions. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. Her voice became sharper. Why won't you tell me? Because Michael had asked me not to. Because Daniel had advised me to wait. Because I needed to understand whether my daughter wanted her mother back or simply wanted security. I think we should speak with Daniel. She became immediately defensive. A lawyer? Yes. Why? Because this situation has become larger than us. She started crying. I don't understand why you're doing this. I felt tears forming in my own eyes. Lauren, I don't understand either. And that was the truth. Because somewhere between childhood and adulthood, my daughter had begun seeing our home differently. Somewhere between marriage and financial pressure, she had started measuring love against property. And somewhere inside that house, Jason still believed he had control. 2 days later, Linda called again. Catherine. What happened? I saw contractors. Contractors. They were measuring rooms. I felt cold. For what? I heard Jason talking. My heart pounded. What did he say? Linda hesitated. He mentioned renovations. I looked out Evelyn's kitchen window. The snow had begun falling. Winter had finally arrived. And inside my house, my daughter and her husband were making plans, changing rooms, discussing loans, talking about the future, completely unaware that Michael Reed had already decided that future years before. And very soon, they were going to discover something neither of them had ever bothered to check. Who actually owned the house? 3 days after Daniel spoke to the bank, a letter arrived. At first, I almost ignored it. Evelyn handed me the envelope while we were eating breakfast. It came this morning. The return address belonged to the mortgage department of a local bank. My hands immediately became cold. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice requesting clarification regarding ownership documentation connected to my property. My property. The words seemed almost unreal. For weeks, I had felt as though I had lost everything. Yet now, strangers were reminding me that the house still legally belonged to me. The letter stated that certain information submitted during a preliminary lending inquiry did not match existing ownership records. No loan had been approved. No account had been opened. But additional documentation had been requested. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Evelyn looked worried. What does it mean? It means someone tried to use the house. She didn't ask who. She already knew. I called Daniel immediately. He asked me to bring the letter to his office. An hour later, I sat across from him again. He carefully reviewed the document. Then he removed his glasses. This confirms it. What exactly? Jason attempted to establish financial authority connected to the property. I felt sick. Did he commit a crime? Not necessarily. Then what? Daniel folded the letter. He assumed the property would eventually belong to Lauren. He knew nothing about the trust. Correct. Then why risk it? Daniel looked directly at me. Desperation. The word hung heavily in the room. Desperation. Financial pressure. Debt. Fear. Perhaps Jason had convinced himself that the house was already theirs. Perhaps Lauren had convinced herself too. But assumptions did not change legal documents. Daniel opened another folder. There is something else. My heart immediately accelerated. What? The bank employee mentioned that Jason described himself as someone responsible for future ownership. I looked down. Future ownership, not present ownership. He still didn't know. Neither of them did. Daniel leaned forward. Catherine, you now have choices. What kind of choices? You can remain silent. I nodded. You can immediately enforce your legal rights. And Lauren? He sighed. That is the difficult part. Because despite everything, Lauren was still my daughter. Even after the rain, even after the words, even after being thrown out. Part of me still wanted to protect her. Daniel seemed to understand. Michael anticipated this. He did. He specifically asked me to give you time. I looked at him. Time for what? For Lauren to show who she truly is. The words hurt. Because perhaps she already had. That afternoon, I returned to Evelyn's house and sat alone in the guest room. I looked at old photographs on my phone. Lauren at 6 years old. Lauren learning to ride a bicycle. Lauren at her high school graduation. Lauren dancing with Michael at her wedding. I kept searching for the moment when everything changed. But life doesn't work that way. People rarely become strangers overnight. The changes happen quietly. Small choices, small compromises, small selfishnesses, until eventually the person you love no longer resembles the one you remember. The next evening, my phone rang again. Lauren. I stared at her name. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Instead, I answered. Hello? She sounded nervous. Mom, can we meet? I remained silent. Please. Why? I miss you. Those 3 words nearly broke me. Because I missed her too. Terribly. But missing someone does not erase what happened. When? Tomorrow. Where? She hesitated. Maybe the house. The house. Not home. The house. No. Mom, I won't come there. Silence. Then she asked something that surprised me. Have you talked to Daniel? My heart skipped. Why? Jason mentioned him. Of course he did. He used to work with Dad. I know. Her voice became cautious. Did Dad leave paperwork? I could almost hear Jason listening nearby, waiting, calculating. I answered carefully. Your father made his own decisions. She sounded frustrated. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. She lowered her voice. Mom, are we in trouble? The question stunned me. Not, are you okay? Not, can we fix this? Not, can I apologize instead? Are we in trouble? For the first time, I realized something painful. Lauren was frightened, but perhaps not for the reasons I wanted. "I don't know," I said honestly. She began crying. "I never wanted this." "Then why did it happen?" She didn't answer. Instead, she whispered, "Jason said we needed stability." "And what did you want?" Another long silence. Finally, "I wanted us to be together." I closed my eyes. Because somewhere inside her, my daughter still existed. But she had allowed someone else's fears to become her own. After the call ended, Evelyn sat beside me. "What did she say?" "She asked if they're in trouble." Evelyn shook her head. "Not if you're okay." "No." She looked sad. "Catherine, you need to stop protecting everyone." That night, I could not sleep. Around midnight, I walked into the kitchen. The moonlight filled the room. I thought about Michael, his warnings, his preparations, his trust. Perhaps he had understood something that I refused to see. Love without boundaries eventually becomes permission. And permission eventually becomes expectation. The next morning, Daniel called. "I've arranged a meeting." My stomach tightened. "A meeting?" "Yes." "With who?" "Lauren and Jason." I stood completely still. "When?" "Friday." "Why?" "Because this situation cannot continue." I sat down slowly. "What happens at the meeting?" Daniel became quiet. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether your daughter wants a mother." I swallowed. "And if she doesn't?" His answer came softly. "Then she will discover who owns the house." The rest of the week passed slowly. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every memory seemed to return. Lauren's first day of school, her college graduation, Michael teaching her to drive, the three of us decorating Christmas trees. How had we arrived here on Thursday evening? Linda visited. She brought pie. She sat beside me for nearly an hour. Before leaving, she said something I will never forget. "Catherine, you are not the one who broke this family." After she left, I sat alone. The trust documents rested on the table, Michael's letters beside them. For years, I believed grief was the hardest thing a woman could endure. I was wrong. The hardest thing is realizing that love cannot save someone who no longer sees you clearly. Friday morning finally arrived. I dressed carefully, the same blue coat Michael had bought me years earlier. The pearl earrings Lauren had given me on my 60th birthday. As I stood before the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked older, but because something inside me had changed. The frightened woman standing in the rain had disappeared. In her place stood a wife carrying her husband's final promise. And somewhere across town, Lauren and Jason were driving toward Daniel's office, still believing they understood the future, still believing the house would eventually become theirs, still unaware that Michael Reed had already written the conditions years ago, and in just a few hours, the truth would finally enter the room. Friday morning arrived with gray skies and freezing rain. The weather reminded me of the night Lauren told me I was homeless. I stood in Evelyn's guest bedroom for nearly 20 minutes staring at myself in the mirror. I looked older, not because of age, because of disappointment. I wore the blue wool coat Michael had bought me during our 30th wedding anniversary trip. The same pearl earrings Lauren had given me years earlier sat against my neck. For a moment, I almost removed them, but I didn't. She was still my daughter. No matter what happened inside Daniel Brooks's office, that truth would remain. Evelyn drove me downtown. Neither of us spoke very much. As we approached the building, my hands began shaking. "Catherine," Evelyn said softly, "you don't have to protect everyone today." I nodded, but protecting people had been my entire life. Teacher, wife, mother, caregiver, protector. I wasn't sure who I was without those roles. Daniel greeted us personally. His expression was serious. "They've already arrived." My stomach tightened. "Lauren?" "Both of them." He guided us toward the conference room. I could hear voices behind the closed door. Jason's voice, Lauren's voice. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Then Daniel placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "Michael trusted you." I took a breath and entered the room. Lauren stood immediately. "Mom!" She looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. She had clearly been crying. Jason remained seated. His expression was calm, but I noticed tension in his jaw. "Catherine," he said. Nobody attempted to hug me. Nobody apologized. The silence felt unbearable. Daniel sat at the head of the table. Several folders rested in front of him. The same folders Michael had prepared years earlier. Lauren looked at them. "What are those?" Daniel folded his hands. "Today, we need to discuss several matters." Jason leaned forward. "We really want to resolve this privately." Daniel nodded. "That depends on the circumstances." Lauren looked at me. "Mom, I never wanted things to go this far." I answered honestly. "Neither did I." She lowered her eyes. Jason spoke. "We've all been emotional." I looked directly at him. "You went to a bank." His face changed slightly. "It was only an inquiry." "About my house. Our future." Daniel interrupted. "Let's stay focused." He opened one folder. "First ownership." Lauren immediately spoke. "The house belongs to Mom." Daniel looked at her. "Partially correct." She frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel removed several documents. "The property located in Columbus, Ohio, was transferred into the Reed Family Trust several years ago." Jason sat perfectly still. Lauren looked confused. "A trust?" "Yes." She looked at me. "You knew." I answered quietly. "Not until recently." Daniel continued. "The trust was established by Michael Reed." Lauren's eyes filled with tears at her father's name. Jason spoke carefully. "What does this mean legally?" Daniel looked directly at him. "It means the property cannot be sold, refinanced, transferred, borrowed against, or inherited outside the trust conditions." The room became very quiet. Jason's expression changed. "What conditions?" Daniel opened another document. Michael's signature rested at the bottom. He slowly read, "The primary controlling trustee is Catherine Reed." Lauren blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your mother controls the property." Jason shifted in his chair. "And afterward?" Daniel looked at Lauren. "Your father created a conditional inheritance provision." Lauren looked confused. "A what?" Daniel removed one final page. I recognized Michael's handwriting. He read aloud. "Any future inheritance rights are dependent upon maintaining a loving, respectful, and supportive relationship with Catherine Reed. Any acts of coercion, financial pressure, emotional manipulation, or removal of her residence rights shall constitute a violation of these conditions." Silence. Absolute silence. Lauren stared at him. Jason stared at the table. I couldn't breathe. Michael had seen everything, years ago, long before any of us. Lauren finally whispered, "No." Daniel continued, "Under these circumstances, your future interest may be void." Lauren looked at me. Her face had become pale. "You knew." Tears filled my eyes. "No." "You didn't." "I found out recently." Jason suddenly spoke. "This is ridiculous." Daniel looked at him. "Excuse me." "Conditional inheritance. It is perfectly legal." Jason's voice became sharper. "Michael never told us." Daniel answered calmly. "That was his choice." Lauren began crying. "My father didn't trust me." I wanted to answer. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't, because the truth was far more painful. Michael had loved her, but he had feared something that had eventually happened. Daniel turned another page. "There is one additional matter." Jason became very still. "The bank inquiry." Lauren looked confused. "What bank?" Nobody answered immediately. Daniel finally spoke. "Mr. Mitchell made inquiries regarding the property." Lauren turned toward her husband. "What?" Jason looked uncomfortable. "It wasn't a loan." Daniel spoke. "It was a preliminary lending inquiry." Lauren stared at him. "You went to a bank?" Jason sighed. "I was exploring options." "What options?" "Our future." Lauren looked horrified. "You told me you were just asking about property values." Jason's face hardened. "I was trying to help us." Daniel interrupted. "Did you inform the bank that the property belonged to the trust?" Jason said nothing. "Did you inform them that Catherine Reed was the controlling trustee?" Still silence. The room felt smaller. Lauren's voice trembled. "Jason," he looked at her. "We needed stability." You wanted a future too." Lauren shook her head. "Not like this." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing money, fear of losing the truth about herself. Daniel reached into another folder. "There is one final document." He handed it to me. Michael's letter, the same one Daniel had shown me. He looked at Lauren. "Your father instructed me to share part of this if circumstances required." Lauren wiped her tears. Daniel read, "If my daughter someday forgets that her mother is a person before she is a parent, then I hope time teaches what love could not." Lauren broke, completely. She began sobbing. Oh God, I wanted to go to her. Every instinct inside me wanted to hold my child, but I remained seated, because some pain cannot be protected from. Some lessons must be felt. Lauren looked at me. "Mom, I'm sorry." Her voice sounded like that of a frightened little girl. "I didn't know," I answered honestly. "I know." Jason stood abruptly. "This is unfair." Daniel looked up. "Mr. Mitchell." "We moved there to help." Daniel's voice became colder. "And yet Catherine Reed no longer lived in her own home." Jason said nothing. Daniel continued. "And you explored financial options involving property you did not control." Jason's jaw tightened. "I never stole anything." "No." Daniel folded the documents. "But you made assumptions." The room became quiet once again. Lauren sat with tears streaming down her face. Jason stared at the table. And I sat there realizing something that changed me forever. My husband had died believing I might someday need protection. He had trusted me enough to leave me control. He had trusted Daniel. And perhaps most importantly, he had trusted that one day I would finally stop surrendering myself to keep everyone else comfortable. When the meeting ended, nobody stood immediately. Nobody knew what to say. Lauren finally whispered, "Mom, what happens now?" I looked at my daughter. The answer would determine the rest of our lives. And for the first time, I realized that neither Lauren nor Jason had ever truly lost the house. What they had lost was something much more valuable: my trust. After the meeting ended, nobody knew where to go. Lauren sat motionless in her chair. Jason stood beside the window with his arms crossed. Daniel quietly organized the documents, and I simply sat there staring at Michael's signature. Even years after his death, my husband had entered the room and changed everything. Lauren finally looked at me. "Mom." Her voice trembled. I turned toward her. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not because of age, because the certainty she had carried for months had disappeared. "Did Dad really write those conditions?" I nodded. "Yes." Tears rolled down her face. "He thought I would hurt you." The question pierced my heart, because I honestly didn't know the answer. Perhaps Michael had only worried. Perhaps he had simply wanted to protect me. Or perhaps he had seen exactly what would happen. "I think your father loved you very much," I said quietly. She lowered her head. "Then why?" Nobody answered. Daniel finally spoke. "Michael never questioned his love for you." Lauren looked up. "But he questioned me." Daniel hesitated. "He worried about circumstances." Jason suddenly stood. "This is all because of money." Daniel looked at him. "No." Jason shook his head. "You think I'm some criminal. I think you made serious mistakes. I was trying to protect my family." Daniel's voice became firmer. "By investigating property that did not belong to you." Jason looked angry. "I never intended to steal anything." The room became quiet, because perhaps that was true. Perhaps he never imagined himself as a dishonest man. Perhaps he convinced himself that the house would eventually belong to Lauren anyway. Perhaps he believed he was simply moving things forward, but intentions do not erase consequences. Lauren looked toward him. "You went to the bank." Jason rubbed his forehead. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it mattered." She stared at him. It mattered. For the first time, I saw tension between them. Not because of the house, because secrets had entered their marriage, the same way they had entered our family. Daniel closed the folders. "I think today's meeting is finished." Nobody moved. Finally, Lauren stood. She walked toward me slowly. I honestly didn't know what she intended to do. Then she knelt beside my chair, just as she had done when she was a little girl asking forgiveness. Her voice broke. "Mom, I'm sorry." Tears immediately filled my eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her. The little girl who used to sleep beside me during thunderstorms suddenly appeared again. But so did the woman who had told me I was homeless. Both people existed, and I loved them both. "I know." She cried harder. "No, you don't." Her hands trembled. I was angry. "About what?" "Everything." I remained silent. She looked down. "The money. The debt. Jason losing clients. The pressure." She wiped her eyes. "We were drowning." I listened. For the first time in months, my daughter was finally speaking honestly. She continued. "When Dad died, I thought everything would eventually be okay." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "I thought the house would protect us." The words hurt, because there it was, the truth. Not greed, not exactly. Fear. Fear disguised as entitlement. Fear disguised as planning. Fear disguised as helping. I wasn't waiting for you to die, she whispered. I know. But I kept thinking that someday the house would solve our problems. My heart broke, because Michael had been right. Parents sometimes become solutions instead of people. Jason finally spoke quietly. I told her we'd eventually inherit it. Lauren looked at him. You promised me. He lowered his eyes. I believed it. Daniel stood. Belief does not change ownership. Nobody argued, because nobody could. As we left the office, Lauren followed me. The hallway felt strangely quiet. Mom! I turned. She looked terrified. Are you taking the house away from me? The question surprised me, because even now she still feared losing something she never possessed. I answered honestly. There was never anything to take away. She began crying again. I don't know how this happened. Neither did I. Perhaps there isn't one moment when families break. Perhaps there are thousands of small moments, small silences, small resentments, small compromises, small lies. Until one day, a daughter looks at her mother and sees a house instead of a human being. Evelyn drove me home. Halfway there, she asked, What do you want now? I looked out the window. Snow covered the sidewalks. Children were building snowmen. Christmas decorations had begun appearing throughout the city. What did I want? I wanted Michael. I wanted my family. I wanted the years before money entered every conversation. But those things no longer existed. I want peace. Evelyn nodded. Then decide what peace looks like. That evening, my phone rang. Lauren, again. This time I answered immediately. Mom? Yes. I left the house. I sat upright. What? I'm staying with a friend tonight. Why? Her voice trembled. I couldn't stay there. What about Jason? He stayed. I felt uneasy. Are you all right? She began crying again. I walked into your bedroom. I said nothing. I saw your side of the closet. My chest tightened. Everything was gone. She continued. The room looked empty. For several seconds she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, I finally understood what I did. I closed my eyes, because perhaps this was the first moment she truly saw me. Not as a mother, not as an inheritance, not as security, but as a woman who had lost her husband and then lost her home. I sat on your bed for an hour, she said, and all I could think about was you standing in the rain. I couldn't speak. Neither could she. Finally, she whispered, I'm ashamed. Tears rolled down my face, because shame is painful. But it also means conscience is alive. After the call ended, I sat alone in Evelyn's kitchen. Michael's letters rested beside me. For years, I had believed his final gift was the trust, the protection, the house. But perhaps his real gift had been time. Time for truth to appear. Time for masks to fall. Time for my daughter to see herself clearly. Late that night, another phone call came. This time, it was Linda. Catherine? What happened? She hesitated. I saw Jason. At the house? Yes. What was he doing? Linda lowered her voice. He was loading boxes into his car. I sat perfectly still. What kind of boxes? I don't know. She paused. But Catherine? Yes. He looked angry. After the call ended, I couldn't sleep because something had changed. Lauren was finally beginning to understand. But Jason had just lost everything he thought he controlled. And I had a feeling he was not going to let go quietly. The morning after Lauren left the house, snow covered most of Columbus. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Not because my problems had disappeared, not because my family had healed, but because the truth was finally visible. No more lies, no more assumptions, no more pretending. At 8 o'clock, Daniel called. "Catherine, I need to visit the property today." I immediately understood. The house. Yes. My heart began racing. For nearly a month, I had not stepped inside my own home. The idea frightened me. Daniel continued. "I'd like you to come." I looked out Evelyn's kitchen window. The snow fell quietly. "What if I can't?" His voice softened. "You can." An hour later, Daniel arrived with another attorney from his office. Evelyn insisted on coming. As we drove toward my neighborhood, I felt exactly as I had the day Michael died. As though I were preparing to lose something important. The house appeared exactly where it always had. The white siding, the maple tree, the front porch. Yet everything felt different. My car no longer sat in the driveway. The curtains had changed. Even the front door looked unfamiliar. Daniel parked. "Are you ready?" "No," but I nodded anyway. Jason answered the door. He looked exhausted. His beard had grown. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel introduced himself formally. "We need to discuss the property." Jason stepped aside. The house smelled different. Different candles, different furniture, different decorations. Several of Michael's photographs had disappeared. The blanket I kept on the sofa was gone. The living room looked as though someone had staged it for sale. And suddenly, I understood something. This wasn't simply about ownership. It was about erasing history. Jason noticed me looking around. "We were trying to improve things." I didn't answer, because improvements do not remove memories. Daniel sat at the dining table, the same table where Jason had once placed those power of attorney documents before me. Life has strange ways of returning people to important places. Jason sat across from him. I remained standing. Daniel spoke calmly. "The trust agreement gives Catherine full authority regarding the property." Jason rubbed his forehead. "I understand." "Do you—" He nodded. "I didn't before." Daniel opened several documents. "Mrs. Reed intends to resume occupancy." The words felt unreal. Resume occupancy. My home. My life. My place. Jason looked down. "When?" Daniel answered. "Soon." The silence stretched. Finally, Jason said something I never expected. "I lost everything." I looked at him. His voice sounded tired. "The business. The clients. The money." He laughed bitterly. "And now this." For the first time, I saw not an enemy, but a frightened man. A man who had built his future upon assumptions. Daniel remained firm. "Financial hardship does not justify pressure." Jason nodded. "I know." He looked toward me. "I'm sorry." The words surprised me, because until that moment, Jason had defended himself, explained himself, justified himself. Now he simply looked defeated. "I never wanted to hurt you." I answered honestly. "But you did." He lowered his eyes. "I convinced myself it would eventually belong to Lauren. And because of that," he swallowed, "I stopped seeing you." The honesty hurt, because it was true. People rarely become cruel all at once. Sometimes they simply stop seeing another person's humanity. The front door suddenly opened. Lauren. She froze. She had apparently not expected to see me. Neither of us moved. Then tears immediately filled her eyes. "Mom." Her voice broke. I nodded. She looked around the room, at Daniel, at Jason, at me. Everything had changed. Jason stood. "We should talk." Lauren looked at him. "No." The answer surprised everyone. She took a breath. "No more pretending." She looked directly at him. "You lied to me." Jason looked exhausted. "I was trying to fix things. You were trying to fix money." He said nothing. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You told me this house would save us." He answered quietly. "I believed that." But Dad was right. The room became silent. Lauren looked toward Michael's empty chair. "My father saw us before we saw ourselves." I felt tears forming again, because perhaps that was true. Jason finally spoke. "What happens now?" Lauren answered before anyone else. "We leave." He stared at her. "What?" She wiped her eyes. "We leave." Daniel looked at her. "Lauren." She shook her head. "This is Mom's house." The words seemed to echo through the room. Not our house, not my house, Mom's house. For the first time in months, my daughter had finally said it. Jason looked stunned. "We have nowhere to go." Lauren closed her eyes. "I know." "And your mother?" She looked at me. Tears fell again. "I already took her home away." No one spoke. The truth sat between us, heavy, painful, impossible to avoid. Over the next several days, Daniel helped organize everything. Jason rented a small apartment. Lauren moved temporarily into a friend's spare bedroom. Some neighbors began hearing pieces of the story. Linda, of course, already knew. She came to see me. "Catherine, people are talking." I smiled sadly. "They always do." She touched my hand. "But they know the truth." The following Saturday, I returned to the house. My house. The snow had melted. The front yard looked tired. Daniel handed me the keys. The same keys I had carried for 40 years. My hands shook. When I opened the front door, silence greeted me. No television, no arguments, no footsteps. Only silence. I walked slowly through every room. The kitchen, the dining room, the living room, Michael's workshop, our bedroom. In the closet, some of my clothes still hung untouched. On the nightstand sat Michael's old watch. I picked it up, and finally, I cried. Not because I had lost my family, not because I had won, because this never felt like victory. There are no winners when families break, only survivors. Later that afternoon, Linda stopped by. Several neighbors waved. People who had watched me raise Lauren. People who had seen me walk through widowhood. People who had watched me leave in the rain. One elderly neighbor hugged me. "We knew something wasn't right." I smiled. "I didn't." That evening, I sat alone on the back porch. The maple tree stood quietly in the yard. The same tree Michael planted when Lauren was born. I thought about him, about his trust, about his warnings, about his love. The house had returned to me. The legal battle was over. Jason was gone. The truth was known. But one question still remained. Could a mother forgive a daughter who had forgotten she was human? My phone vibrated. Lauren. I stared at her name for nearly a minute. Finally, I answered. Her voice was barely audible. Mom! Yes. She began crying. I don't know how to come home. I looked around the empty house. The house Michael built. The house I had almost lost. And suddenly, I realized something. Perhaps taking back the house had been the easy part. The difficult part was deciding whether I could ever open the front door again. For nearly 2 weeks after I returned home, the house remained quiet. The silence no longer frightened me. In fact, I began to appreciate it. Every morning, I made coffee in my own kitchen. I sat beside the window where Michael used to read the newspaper. I watered the plants. I reopened the curtains. Slowly, the house began feeling like mine again. Some things had changed. The furniture, the decorations, the empty spaces where photographs had once hung. But memories are stronger than furniture. Little by little, I restored the rooms. I placed Michael's pictures back onto the shelves. I returned his favorite chair to the living room. I found our wedding photograph in a storage box inside the garage. Someone had wrapped it carefully. I wasn't sure whether Lauren or Jason had done it. I placed it above the fireplace. When I stepped back and looked at it, I suddenly realized something. For the first time in years, I was no longer afraid of living alone. One afternoon, Evelyn visited. She carried a small apple pie. You look different, she said. Older. She laughed. No, stronger. I smiled. Perhaps she was right. For so many years, I had measured my worth through other people. My husband, my daughter, my family. But now, I was finally learning something Michael had tried to teach me. Love should never require surrender. A few days later, Lauren called again. This time, I answered immediately. Mom! Her voice sounded quieter than before. How are you? I'm all right. There was a long silence. Then she asked, Can I see you? I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where she had eaten breakfast before school. The same kitchen where she had once sat doing homework. The same kitchen where we had argued. Whenever you're ready. I wasn't ready. But I also knew something important. If I waited until the pain disappeared, I might wait forever. Sunday. She exhaled softly. Thank you. On Sunday afternoon, snow covered the front yard. I baked Michael's favorite cinnamon cake. I don't know why. Perhaps because his presence still guided me. At exactly 2 o'clock, Lauren knocked. She stood alone. No Jason, no excuses, no expectations. She looked tired. Her eyes were swollen. She had lost weight. And for the first time in months, she looked exactly like my daughter. Neither of us moved. Finally, she whispered, May I come in? The question nearly broke me, because months earlier, she had stood inside this house and told me I was homeless. Now she was asking permission to enter. Yes. She stepped inside slowly. Her eyes moved around the room. The photographs, the furniture, Michael's chair. Tears immediately appeared. It looks like home again. I said nothing. We sat in the kitchen, the same table, the same chairs. Yet everything had changed. Lauren looked at her hands. I left Jason. I stared at her. What? She nodded. 2 days ago. I felt a sudden sadness. Not relief, not satisfaction, only sadness. Why? She wiped her eyes. Because I finally realized something. I waited. I kept blaming money. She looked at me. But money wasn't the problem. What was... I stopped listening to myself. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I kept telling myself that we were helping you. She shook her head. But we weren't. I remained silent. She continued. I knew you were uncomfortable. I knew you were hurting. I knew you didn't want those papers. Her voice broke, and I ignored it. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly. Snow fell outside. Finally, she whispered, When I watched you walk into the rain, part of me knew I had done something terrible. My own tears began to fall. Then why didn't you stop me? She covered her face. Because I was angry. About what? She lowered her hands. That Dad trusted you more. The honesty shocked me. He loved you. I know. No, Lauren. She looked at me. He adored you. Her shoulders shook. Then why didn't he trust me? I looked toward Michael's photograph. Perhaps only he truly knew. But I answered as honestly as I could. Maybe he trusted the daughter he raised. She began crying harder. And not the woman I became. I reached across the table. For the first time in months, I took my daughter's hand. Her fingers trembled. I think your father wanted you to find your way back. She looked at me. Can you forgive me? The question sat between us. Because forgiveness sounds beautiful until someone asks for it. I thought about the rain, the suitcase, the humiliation, the loneliness, the words. You're homeless now. I also thought about her first steps, her childhood fevers, her wedding, the day Michael held her after she was born. Mothers carry all versions of their children at once. The innocent child, the difficult teenager, the hurting adult, the person who causes pain, and the person who asks for forgiveness. I don't know yet. She nodded. I understand. But I want to try. Her face collapsed. She cried openly. So did I. We sat together for nearly an hour. No lawyers, no documents, no trust agreements. Only two women trying to find each other again. Before leaving, Lauren stood beside Michael's photograph. I failed him. I walked beside her. No. She looked at me. You forgot what he taught you. She nodded slowly. At the front door, she hesitated. Do you think Jason is a bad person? The question surprised me. I considered it carefully. No. Then what happened? I looked out at the snow. I think he became afraid. And me. I turned toward her. I think you became afraid too. She lowered her eyes. And fear can make people mistake security for love. She nodded. Before leaving, she hugged me. Not the polite embrace of adults, the desperate hug of a daughter. She cried against my shoulder. I miss Dad. I closed my eyes. So do I. After she left, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt different. Not healed, but softer. That evening, I opened Michael's wooden box one final time. Inside remained his letters, his notes, his trust documents, his final protections. I read his words again. Protect your heart. For the first time, I understood. He had never wanted me to choose between my daughter and myself. He wanted me to save both, but only if both could be saved. Outside, snow covered the yard. Inside, the house remained warm. And for the first time in many months, I believed that perhaps broken families could sometimes find their way home, even if they returned one painful step at a time. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow disappeared from the yard. The maple tree behind the house began growing new leaves. The flower beds that Michael and I had planted years earlier slowly returned to life. And somehow, so did I. For the first time since Michael died, I stopped merely surviving. I began living again. Every morning, I opened the curtains. I drank coffee on the back porch. I attended church regularly. I met Evelyn for lunch. I joined my old book club, and little by little, the woman I had been before grief returned. Not completely. Loss never disappears. It simply learns to sit quietly beside you. Lauren continued calling. At first, once a week, then every few days. Sometimes we talked for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. We did not discuss the house. We did not discuss the trust. We did not discuss inheritance. Instead, we talked about ordinary things, recipes, weather, television shows, memories. One afternoon, she asked if she could help me plant flowers. I hesitated. Then I said yes. She arrived carrying gardening gloves. For several minutes, we worked silently. The soil smelled fresh. Birds sang above us. The same backyard where she had once played as a child surrounded us. Finally, she spoke. I met with a counselor. I looked up. For what? She wiped dirt from her hands. Everything. I waited. My marriage. My anger. My fear. She swallowed. And Dad. Tears filled her eyes. I think I was still angry that he died. I understood that feeling. Grief sometimes disguises itself. Sometimes it becomes anger. Sometimes control. Sometimes fear. Sometimes entitlement. She continued. When Jason started talking about security, I listened. She looked at me. Because I was scared. I nodded. I know. No. Her voice shook. I don't think you do. She sat down beside the flower bed. I was terrified. Of what? Ending up alone. I felt my heart break again. Because she was my daughter. And perhaps she had inherited more from me than I realized. I thought if we had the house, everything would be okay. She wiped her eyes. But the house couldn't save us. I sat beside her. No. The house couldn't save Dad. No. It couldn't save my marriage. No. She looked at me. And it couldn't replace you. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere nearby, children laughed. Life continued. Finally, she whispered, I'm getting divorced. I turned toward her. Are you sure? She nodded. We tried counseling. And he still thinks your father was unfair. I understood. Because Jason had lost something he believed he deserved. And people rarely accept disappointment easily. She looked down. I don't hate him. Neither do I. He was scared too. I nodded. Fear had entered our family long before money did. Money simply gave the fear a shape. Several weeks later, Daniel invited me to his office. This time, the meeting felt entirely different. No arguments, no accusations, no legal threats. only closure. He reviewed the trust, the property, the future. Then he asked, "Have you considered changing anything?" I thought about the question. Months earlier, I might have answered quickly. Now I understood something Michael had tried to teach me. Time changes people. Pain changes people. Love changes people. I don't know. Daniel smiled. That's perfectly acceptable. He handed me Michael's final letter, the one I had read dozens of times. Keep this. I held it carefully. You know, he said, Michael worried that you would always put yourself last. I laughed softly. He knew me well. He also believed you would eventually learn not to. As I left his office, sunlight filled the street. For the first time in a very long time, I felt peace. Not happiness, not perfect healing, simply peace. Several months later, Lauren invited me to dinner, a small restaurant near the river. She looked healthier, stronger, older somehow. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Before leaving, she reached into her purse. She handed me an envelope. "What is this?" She smiled sadly. I wrote something. Inside was a letter. I read it later that evening. Mom. I spent months believing the house represented love. I thought security meant walls, property, and inheritance. I forgot that love is not something we receive after someone dies. It is something we protect while they are alive. I cannot change what I said. I cannot erase the rain. I cannot take back the moment I told you that you were homeless. But I want you to know something. You were never homeless. I was. Because I had forgotten where home truly was. I love you. Lauren. I cried harder than I had in months. Because forgiveness sometimes arrives quietly. Not through grand speeches, not through dramatic moments, but through honesty. On the first anniversary of Michael's death, Lauren and I visited his grave together. We brought fresh flowers, the same white lilies he loved. We stood quietly. Finally, Lauren whispered, "Dad was right." I smiled through tears. He usually was. She laughed softly. Then she looked at the sky. I think he saved both of us. Perhaps he did. As we walked back toward the car, I looked at my daughter. Not the frightened woman who had chosen fear, not the angry woman who had chosen security, but the daughter who had found her way back. The house still belongs to me. The trust remains unchanged. The future remains uncertain. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Because a home is not a reward. It is not payment. It is not an inheritance. A home is where people are loved before they deserve it, protected before they understand it, and forgiven when they finally return. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret protecting the house. I always answer the same way. No, because Michael never protected the house. He protected me, and by protecting me, he gave my daughter the opportunity to become herself again. The last thing Lauren said to me before leaving the cemetery was this, "Mom, thank you for coming home." I smiled, because after everything that happened, I finally understood. The woman standing in the rain had never been homeless. She had simply forgotten that she belonged to herself. Sometimes, life teaches us its most important lessons through the people we love the most. This story was never really about a house. It was never about legal documents, inheritance, or property. It was about something far more valuable. Respect, dignity, and the quiet truth that parents are human beings long before they become mothers and fathers. As children grow older, they often forget how much their parents sacrificed to build the lives they now enjoy. A mother spends decades putting everyone else first. She gives her time, her energy, her dreams, and sometimes even her own identity. Yet love should never require someone to disappear. One of the hardest lessons in life is understanding that love and boundaries can exist together. You can love your children deeply while still protecting yourself. You can forgive someone without allowing them to hurt you again. You can open your heart without giving away your dignity. Catherine learned that being kind does not mean becoming invisible. Lauren learned that security cannot be found in money, property, or inheritance. True security comes from relationships, honesty, and gratitude. And Michael taught us something beautiful. Sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting the people we care about, even after we are gone. Many of us carry guilt because we think saying no means we love less. But sometimes saying no is the very thing that saves a family. Because when boundaries are clear, love has room to survive. If you are a parent, never forget that your life still matters. If you are a son or daughter, remember that your parents are growing older too. They carry fears, loneliness, grief, and hopes just like anyone else. And if you have made mistakes, remember that it is never too late to return home with honesty in your heart. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If this story touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a family conflict that changed your life? What lessons stayed with you the most? And before you leave, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue sharing stories about family forgiveness, strength, and second chances. No matter where you're watching from, and no matter what time it is in your corner of the world, please know this: you are never too old to protect your peace, and it is never too late to find your way home.